This episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by Byron Seeds. The folks at Byron Seeds believe organic requires a different perspective, plan, and approach. Organic isn't simply a different type of product or even a different way of farming. It's a different way of thinking, planning, commitment. It's a different philosophy on how to feed the world. Many won't understand, but the people at Byron Seeds do. We're owned by organic dairy farmers. We not only have the product, but we plan, manage, and execute organic. We speak your language, we share your struggles, and we laud your successes. Organic isn't a way of doing business, it's a community. We learn from each other. We're in this together. We'd be glad to talk cropping plans, management systems, the road to profitability. We understand what you're trying to do. We're farmers just like you. Visit us at byronseeds.net or give us a call at 800-801-3596. And thanks to Byron Seeds. Back to the Roots is also brought to you by Soil Biotics. Soil Biotics Efficient is a fish-emulsion-based liquid organic fertilizer concentrate providing a rich source of nutrients that slowly break down and release nitrogen into the soil. It can be used in organic programs as an excellent food source for soil microbes. Also, SB Super Sweet is a unique new liquid formulation of natural sugars. It is a source of quick carbon consumption for feeding and increasing populations of bacteria and microorganisms in soils. Soil Biotics organic products are formulated to work together to provide a continuous beneficial growth environment to meet all of your organic agricultural needs. For product details, visit soilbiotics.com. Finally, we are brought to you by our newest sponsor, Elite Equine and Farm Supply. Elite Equine and Farm Supply strives to provide the equine world with the most innovative and highest quality health and wellness products on the market. Elite Equine offers the Equilume masks and stable light fixtures to horse breeders and performance horse trainers across the country. If you've been looking for top quality supplements for your horses, look no further. We have you covered with hemp supplements and the Tribute Equine Nutritions. Elite Equine also offers the most innovative horse blanket, which provides heat and massage therapy for your horse on demand. Elite Equine is located in the heart of Amish country, just a quarter mile north of Mount Hope, Ohio. Be sure to visit their website at eliteequineandfarmsupply.com or visit us on Facebook. And thanks to Elite Equine.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and along with Brian Wood, today we are joined by Kirk Webster. Kirk is the owner and operator of the Champlain Valley Bees and Queens in Middlebury, Vermont. He produces Russian queens and nukes as well as honey, and his apiary has been treatment-free since 2002. Kirk, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us, and can you give us a little bit of an introduction?
Well, I grew up on the East Coast, born in Baltimore, grew up partly in New Jersey, but my real life started when I finished high school in Vermont, and that's where I also got interested in bees. And it was a little tiny high school, just 30 students where I finished in a pretty remote place. Just I wasn't happy living in the suburbs. It kind of meant everything to me to be able to live in a place like that. And it's where I met my best mentors also, the family that ran the farm at this little school. And they had children, about my age. They had 5 kids, a little older and younger than I was. And, I sort of attached myself like a piece of Velcro to their family. They're the ones who really taught me how to have a nice life living in the country, and so it was. Yeah, and it was there. The first year I was there, I hurt my knee really bad in a toboggan crash, and I couldn't ski or do the other things I like to do outside. And I was moping around. Somebody, I can't even remember who it was, just gave me this little book about bees. Thought I might like might be interested. And I just started reading this book. I said, wow, this is really amazing. So that spring, back at my folks in New Jersey, I found a beekeeper who lived in the next town, and Myron Cermak had come from the Ukraine to New Jersey in 1914. And so he remembered the Ukraine before World War I and the Russian Revolution. And anyway, he struggled for quite a few years, but he finally made a big success as importing books and music for the Ukrainian community in New York City. And that enabled him to buy this nice suburban house in New Jersey. But it was, I don't know, if it might have been an acre. It was surrounded by pine trees, so you couldn't really see into the property, but you'd go up the driveway. And it was like a brick sort of English-style house, but he and his wife had made the whole rest of the property look like a Ukrainian village there, with all gardens and all kinds of birdhouses on tall poles and sunflowers everywhere. And, to me, this was just like a magical place, that I had stumbled on. And he was getting pretty elderly, and he's the one who taught me how to actually work with the bees and handle the colonies. And so I would go whenever I was, at my folks' house. I would go to help him with the bees and, lift the heavy boxes and whatnot. And so, that was my introduction, and our routine was always the same. I'd go at about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we march out. Sometimes we work with the bees, but sometimes, we needed help in the gardens, and we would do that, and we would work till about noon, and then, he'd look at his watch. He'd say, "Oh, time for lunch," and we march back to the house. His wife had passed away a few years before, and he would he says, "Okay, I'm a teenager." He's 80-something years. He says, "You sit down and rest." And then he would make the lunch would be like a boiled egg and some cooked vegetables from his garden, and we'd sit there and we'd eat that. And then he would just start talking about the old days in the Ukraine, and my eyes would be bugging out of my head. And he's describing living in houses with just lighted with just candles, and the only heat was this ceramic stoves that had a place for the grandmother to sleep on top of it, and just oxen and horse carts. The only thing his mother sold their only milk cow to enable him to get the passage across to the United States. And anyway, that was sort of my introduction to beekeeping. And I'd worked with him, off and on when I was at home, for a couple years. And one day we were eating lunch, and he looks over at me. He says, "Kirk, you need to seek your fortune in bees." And I hadn't really thought of that before, and he says, you should go and work for Charlie Mraz. He's up in Middlebury, and I sort of filed the name away, and then just after that, I was able to work out so I could finish high school there in Vermont. And the people at the school, the mountain school where I went, had known of Charlie Mraz. He had come to speak to them, or he came to the legislature to speak about pesticides or something. And so anyway, that's I heard of him again. So after school ended that first, it was the end of my junior year, I hitchhiked over to Middlebury and just showed up like a dumb kid on his doorstep. Asked him if I could work for him after I graduated next year. And he says, "Well, we'll see. That's a ways off, but you can sleep on the porch here tonight, and tomorrow we'll go out to the bee yards and we'll see how you like it." And so anyway, that next day was Sunday actually, and he spent Sundays. He had a special queen mating yard near Lake George, about 2 hours away, where the area he used to raise his replacement queen bees. So, and his wife was thrilled that he'd have some company to go with him, because he was getting pretty elderly too. And so we rode down there I just sort of held the smoker a little bit. I already knew how to use the tools, but we harvested some queens, put in the queen cells, and we were driving back, and he says, "Well, did you get stung today?" And I said, "No, I didn't." He goes, "Oh, that's a bad sign." But it turns out Charlie had worked, for many years treating people with arthritis with bee venom. And he became very famous for that, actually, in the latter part of his life. And so anyway, I did end up working for him after I graduated for a year, and that was sort of my introduction to commercial beekeeping. But that was a pretty special opportunity. He had been keeping bees there in Vermont since 1927, when he was sort of in the same position that I was when I showed up at his house. And he worked for a famous beekeeper named J.E. Crane, who went back to really the beginning of the modern commercial beekeeping in the 1880s and even before. And J.E. Crane wrote for the bee magazines through many of those years, but he was already a commercial beekeeper before the invention of the modern beehive and the movable frames, which was very rare at that time. But anyway, so I had kind of access to this lineage, of what Charlie had learned. But and Charlie was my idea of the kind of the modern great man, who was just a working person, but who devoted a huge amount of time to helping other people who were suffering. And he treated all these people with arthritis with much better results than their doctors ever got, and he wouldn't accept any payment. And and I think he was just a natural healer type person, and I think that his generosity had an effect on the people too. But anyway, I witnessed hundreds of people come during that year and get almost everyone gets some relief from arthritis from bee venom, and there are sometimes really dramatic cases and recoveries too. It just depends on the individual. But
I want to go back at first to the fellow in New Jersey who said, "Seek your fortune in beekeeping."
Yeah, Myron.
What did he see that he made him say that?
Well, I'm not sure, but I just assume because I got along with the bees right away, and there's just certain people who are comfortable around bees and who are sort of fascinated by them, and realize that getting stung is a very, very small price to pay for the things that you can learn from them or get from them.
But it still hurts.
It still hurts, but you don't swell up after a while. You still feel it, but it's just most people. Like actually, the first time I got stung when I worked for Charlie, I'd been stung by Myron's before, but when I started working for Charlie in March, the end of the winter, I got stung on my knee, and my whole leg swelled up, like from my ankle to my hip, and I thought, oh my gosh, I won't be able to, I'm allergic to bees, maybe I can't do this. And he says, no, that's still a local reaction. As long as you have just a local reaction, then each time you get stung, it will be less and less, and which was right. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's a lot of lore about the bee venom is really good for you, and beekeepers often live for a long time. And
what is it doing?
Well, we don't know, and we don't know if it's really if that's really working. But apparently, and Charlie later, when he became interested in treating people with arthritis, and he started because he didn't believe that at first, even being a beekeeper, but he had rheumatic fever when he was a young man, and when he recovered, it left him with really, really bad arthritic type joints. And he was not very old, but he had a young family, and so he was still trying to run his apiary. His knees and his hands, just mostly his knees, were just so painful. And he said one day he was just, just out of sheer cussedness, he'd been catching the queen bees where you sit on a stool right next to the hive, so your knees are right there. Said they were just so painful, he took the bees and let them sting right on the most painful spot on his knee. And, he was just so exhausted. He got up and he drove home, and he went to bed. He didn't eat dinner or anything, and he fell asleep. He said he woke up the next morning and there was no more pain in his knees. And he said he woke his wife up, he shook her and says, "Am I awake? Am I really awake?" He says he couldn't believe it. And so that's what made him a believer himself. And then he carried on, and he helped to found. He was basically the reason why the American Apitherapy Society was founded. That still exists today. And so,
as far as getting bee venom, being treated by bee venom, is that extracted somehow, or is it like he did, just put a bunch of bees around the hurting part?
Yeah, well, he developed, I think he borrowed it first from a British beekeeper, but he developed a method of collecting the venom.
Okay.
But he always treated people with the live bees, because if he injected it, that would be practicing without a license. And so he always used the live bees, so no one could prosecute him that way. But he eventually, attracted or forced himself upon the attention of some arthritis researchers, who had to admit that he had cured some of their patients that, had not been able to. But they're not. Bee venom's a really complicated substance, but one of its effects is that it stimulates the body to produce more of its own cortisone. And cortisone is one thing they use for inflammation, but when you inject cortisone, it diminishes the body's ability to produce its own, and so the problem keeps coming back and keeps getting worse. But with bee venom, it stimulates the body's ability to produce cortisone, so the body is able to heal itself. And so that's one. But he later treated people with other diseases too. It didn't have the uniform effect that it does on arthritis, but like chronic fatigue and even MS. He treated people who had MS. And, I met one of his patients, who was just an amazing story, Pat Wagner from Maryland, who was almost terminal from MS, who, like she said, she was a living corpse, a breathing corpse, I think, the way she described it. But it wasn't even Charlie, actually. It was another friend of hers who had bees, who just heard some rumor about, using the bee venom for MS. So he brought some bees, and he just stung her on her legs a few stings. And she said the next morning she could feel her toes again for the first time. She couldn't move them, but she could feel them again. So she decided to keep going, and they had this guy come back, and then they eventually brought Charlie in to help. And I mean, I don't know how long it took, but she completely recovered. And I met her at Charlie's 80th or 85th birthday party, and you would never guess that she had ever been sick. She was just like, she was probably in her late 40s, but she was very attractive and full of energy, and just the kind of the picture of health. And she was interviewed on one of those morning TV shows, and the host asks, the famous host asks, is this a treatment approved by the FDA? And she says no, but it's approved by GOD.
So did Charlie's work in the, not medical, but the healing work with his patients, did that really interest you as well, or was it more just working with the bees that you really enjoyed?
Yeah, I've sort of always pursued really more of the farming part of it. Though I don't make I don't try to find the people, but anyone who asks me for help with with arthritis or whatever, I will treat them like like I learned from Charlie.
Okay.
Which was very simple. Really, it's just finding the most sensitive spots on the joint and applying the stings right on them.
And you would just hold the bee and place it there, and
Yeah, if you grab the bee by her two wings, she can't reach around and sting you, and the stinger is sticking right out. You can just set it down exactly where you want it. You can use forceps for that too. But yeah, and you can put a jar with some bees in the fridge for a while till they're pretty cold and they can't move very fast. And then it's easier to do that. But
the other thing that you mentioned about working with Charlie was the school that you attended had him as a speaker about the effects of pesticides on bees.
Well, actually, now that you remind, he testified at the legislature before the legislative committee, and that's how the school heard of him.
Okay.
And then they invited him to be the graduation speaker.
And I assume that was, a while back, and we're just hearing this in like the public conversation now, the impacts of the sides on the bee colonies. But he was seeing this many, many years ago. Do you know what he was seeing at that time?
What he was seeing?
Like as far as the effect of pesticides on bees that he testified about?
Yeah, no, they started spraying heavily for gypsy moth at one point in Vermont. Like, Vermont, even though we're having some problems today, but most of the time has not had a lot of pesticide problems, but all of a sudden when there was a big gypsy moth infestation and the state was, I don't know if they were trying to decide whether to approve the spraying or doing it themselves or whatever, and Charlie came and brought, some scientific papers about, the effects of pesticides on children and babies. And
what year would this have been?
Well, I graduated from the school myself in '72, and so he spoke as the graduation speaker in '71, and so it was probably in the 1970 that he testified in the State House.
And would the bee population have been declining since then? Or did it level out and then lately really drop off? Or?
Yeah, no, this decline is a more recent thing that really started when the Tracheal Mite first arrived. I believe that was 1985. And, we can jump to this, sort of stick to the organic farming, parts of this. But anyway, I should just say Charlie was one of a charter member of the Natural Foods Associates, it was called, which was the forerunner of the NOFA, Natural Organic Farming Groups in Vermont and New England, rest of New England states. And they brought me to some of their conventions that they had, which were, actually incredible when I think back on them. It's like Philip Callahan spoke there, and students of Adele Davis and just others. I can't remember the Compost King's name, but anyway, that was from the beginning there. But and this gypsy moth thing was kind of a one-off thing. It just was an infestation that it was not a regular occurrence in Vermont, and so that pesticide issue kind of went away. We beekeepers always knew they had to stay 2 miles away from any orchards, apple orchards, because they use so many pesticides. But that's not a huge acreage in Vermont, and so that was really the only danger from pesticides for beekeepers for a long time.
What pollinates an orchard if you keep the bees away?
Well, that's why they rent the bees to bring them in for just the pollination period. And then you have to take them out as right away because they want to start to spray again.
Okay.
And some beekeepers and orchardists often had written contracts with the rules for how this was going to work. So that is where commercial beekeeping came into, like the guys that go to Florida and move up the coast with the weather, pollinating stuff.
that's so they can get it pollinated, get the bees out, and then spray it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all those crops are heavily sprayed. And I was invited to a Vermont, Apple Growers Association meeting one time. This is very early, just to say some basic things about bees and beekeeping. I just had a short, and it was right at the same time when that big alar scare was going on, when I don't know, can't remember, it was like Gwyneth Paltrow, one of the famous actresses, had publicly made a big stand about this and how awful it was, and they were going to. So I went to this meeting and I gave my little talk, but then after I stayed for the rest of the meeting, and they spent a lot of time talking about, I remember the president getting up and say, we're having trouble with alar right now, but what's going to happen when they find out about the other 27 things we applied?
Oh, wow.
Shouldn't that have been the red flag?
What's that?
Shouldn't that have been a red flag for them?
It's the same thing. Corn growers just love to see that 200 bushels of corn growing out there, however they can do it, and
with only corn growing in the field.
Yeah, exactly. And apple growers want to see just the right size apple with no blemishes on them, and as many bushels per acre as possible.
And that's partially the consumer's fault, because they're demanding this impeccable quality that if you do it working with nature, you'll get maybe a better fruit, but appealing, looking at it won't look as nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care how an apple looks if it's great.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, that's the way. And it's like I'd love to point out now, that there is no commodity that is not being grown successfully by organic growers somewhere, somehow. And if you want to learn how to do it, you can go and meet them and visit them. And, it's like the information is out there, but, it's like Gabe Brown said, I just saw recently a little thing he wrote that, most farmers need to have a brain transplant to learn how to grow things organically. It's just the mentality is so different. And
it's the generations that haven't seen farming without the heavy use of herbicides and pesticides.
Yeah.
When you look at my grandpa and then my dad, and the tail end of grandpa's career is when, the atrazine came in, and then dad grew up with that, and dad was the one who kind of saw the problems with it and started going back the other way. But my kids would have been the fourth generation of chemical farming if dad wouldn't have changed that trend. Because probably if dad wouldn't have changed the trend, I would not have grown up knowing how it was without it. So you're seeing that across in agriculture. So hopefully the younger generation will see that you can do it in a different way.
Yeah, it's just you have to seek these people out a lot of times. These meetings are great. That's a really wonderful thing for everyone. But, to be serious about it, you have to find some of these people. And a lot of them are not very good at speaking, or they don't like to come to meetings. And that, that's why they've succeeded so well, because they're just so focused on their situation and their own farm or they have some special connection with the land or their crop and how to grow it. It's like I'm just always amazed at Mr. Fukuoka's books, the One Straw Revolution, and it wasn't in that book, it was in The Natural Way of Farming, I think, but there's this whole chapter just about how beautiful a rice plant is and describing its whole lifespan and everything that was special about it at each stage, things. And that's the kind of person who can solve these problems, or who can make the transition. But it can be expensive. It's not a simple problem, because other things are involved, like the American way of life, like farmers wanting to fit into their community and having the same things that their neighbors have, and and how much income do they need, and what do they want their children to do, or to the enormous amounts of money that it takes for someone to go to school and things like that. And, the things that, the Amish community have shown are not absolutely essential to have a good life or a good community, but it's part of mainstream American culture. And, that's what I've always considered the biggest problem that I've had, was that what I was doing was not part of the culture anymore. Solving the actual problems with bees and their, their weather and their parasites, and as sometimes you would have to describe it as difficult sometimes, but I find it's far more difficult to figure out how to live, a nice life from farming in a culture that doesn't really understand it anymore, or, doesn't care about it that much.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's so striking to me, to come to this meeting, like just to stay at your dad's and to walk out in the morning and just walk up the street to a little high spot and to see, the entire countryside that you can see being farmed in some sensible way, on a sensible scale by families. I mean, it's very moving for me, even though I live in an agricultural area, but it's more like some kind of a rural industrial cartel that's driving everything there.
This morning had a beautiful sunrise yet to boot. It was this morning was one of the nicest sunrises I've seen this whole year.
Wow.
So,
yeah, well,
enjoy the little things.
Yes, well. Yeah,
so you do not treat your bees with anything, like what mainstream beekeeping would. How did you come up with your natural way of doing that?
Yeah, well, for people who aren't that familiar with bees, we had two exotic pests that came here. The first one came from Asia. It was called from Europe. The first one called the Tracheal Mite, and it was a mite that lives in the bee's breathing tube, so it's microscopic. But our bees had never been exposed to it. So when it made its way here, finally, they don't even know how, it just, within 2 years, it was causing about between 30 and 50% loss over the winter time of colonies. See, before this, if anything over a 5% winter loss was considered large. So this kind of seemed like the end of the world to us. But just at that, just before the few years just before that, I had started working on, just by accident, I discovered that little small colonies of bees could survive the winter outdoors. And nobody considered that to be possible. And again, I discovered it by accident. I could explain more tomorrow in my talk. But, and so just when the tracheal mites arrived, I was ramping this up into a system where I would produce extra colonies of bees by making them up in the midsummer and overwintering them as small colonies. And so I had all these extra colonies coming along in the spring. And when the tracheal mites came, I had to give up my idea of selling them, but I had plenty of my own bees that had survived without any treatments or anything to replace my winter losses. So I was losing the most susceptible colonies were perishing, but I still had plenty of colonies to replace them. And within just 2 or 3 years, the apiary had recovered its full strength without any other treatments or of any kind, just by selecting, propagating the ones that were doing the best. And I didn't know why they were doing the best. They just were the ones that survived, that were always strong. And so anyway, that experience had a huge effect on me. But it also, it confirmed this idea that I had learned from my mentors, the family that taught me about organic farming at the mountain school, and who had connections through his time in England with Sir Albert Howard in the very beginning of the organic movement in England. The pests and diseases should really be viewed as friends and allies rather than as enemies to be destroyed, that they're really the indicators of practices that are poorly adapted or unbalanced somehow, and that that was their purpose, was to show us how to bring things back into balance. So I realized when the apiary recovered after 3 years, and was actually, the bees were better than they were before I started that whole process, and I realized the mites had selected the bees better than I was able to do myself. And so that confirmation of that, that principle, made a huge impression on me. And I was just lucky that Tracheal Mite came first before the Varroa Mite, and so I had that already in my mind to try and use when the Varroa Mite came. But the Varroa Mite is the thing that's, the one factor that's, most responsible for the current, downward decline of honeybees, because this was a parasite of an Asian honeybee, a different species that had normal coevolution with the mite, but when it transferred over onto European bees, Apis mellifera, they had not lived together before, and the parasite was just very devastating to it. Our mellifera bees had no defenses against it, and so it was much more destructive to the bees than a parasite can usually afford to be. And that was the problem. It looked like there were no colonies that could survive without somehow interfering, without intervening with some kind of treatment or whatever. But this mite, the Varroa mite's a visible mite. It lives on the outside of the bee. You can see it. But it lives inside the brood. It reproduces inside the brood where the bees are developing and hatching. So it's a pretty difficult problem to kill a mite like that that's living on the bee inside the colony without hurting the bees. But the chemical companies were up to it at first. They for the first treatment they had was actually a very non-toxic one, a pyrethrum type chemical that was just impregnated in a plastic strip, and you'd put it in the hive, and it would spread. The bees would track it around the hive, and it killed all the mites without hurting the bees. And so this seemed like this was a miracle come just in time, to save us. And here's the most disappointing thing in my career was beekeepers used to be the one part of the ag community that were uniformly opposed to pesticides, for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. But then when this situation came along, and this first treatment, I guess it's good that I can't even remember what it's called, but when this came along, it was so easy and it worked so well that beekeepers went just overnight into becoming enthusiastic pesticide applicators themselves, and just hardly lifted a finger to try and find any other solutions. But this is when I knew that, this was a train wreck, waiting to happen, because mites are notorious for developing resistance very quickly to chemical. And it took about 5 years, which is what people who work with these things predicted, that the mites would, in about 5 years, would become resistant to this. So I really tried, I wanted to move to complete non-treatment as fast as I could, because I wanted to see, which bees could actually survive, could actually coexist with the mites, and then could I propagate them? Would those characteristics be, present in the next generation? And it was, I prepared for a couple of years because I knew this would be hard. I knew I would have heavy losses, so I paid off all my debts. I made the apiary smaller so I could spend more time with each colony. I started making my own comb foundation so that I knew that wasn't contaminated with, some kind of mite control chemicals that beekeepers were sure to use, whether they were legal or illegal. And but then the other key thing was we obtained these Russian bees from the far east of Russia. And this was a project that the USDA did, and I have criticized the USDA on many occasions, but this was a really brilliant piece of work that they did. and this Dr. Thomas Rinderer from the Baton Rouge Bee Lab went to the one place on the planet where Apis mellifera bees and these Varroa mites had coexisted for the longest amount of time, which was probably about 200 years in this part of far eastern Russia. And they made some surveys there that ascertained that they were actually had resistance to the mites, and they brought them over here and had a really effective quarantine program. They also brought over a big enough gene pool so that the bees could be propagated here and could grow in North America. And it was a brilliant piece of work, and I always say this one piece of work was of more practical help to me than all the bee research that's been conducted during my lifetime put together. So it was an outlier. It was not, but it was exactly what the industry needed. And again, it was so disappointing to see the response from the rest of the scientific community, who I don't know if they felt threatened by it or but who just tried to diminish it in every way they could and kind of forced Tom Rinderer to retire early. And but he succeeded, and he eventually passed the program on to a bunch of dedicated commercial beekeepers who are still protecting that gene pool and distributing it to other people. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't caught on with the beekeeping community because these bees were behaviorally quite different from the Italian type bees that beekeepers were used to here. And again, it doesn't seem to me like a huge stretch to learn how to deal with these bees.
So how were they different? Were they madder or just?
No, they were gentle, but they were very prone to swarming. They were very eager to swarm, to naturally divide their colonies, and that way you lose a lot of their honey-producing potential. And they also didn't build up big colonies early in the season, which is when the growers want them for pollination, when they want these big. And still today, this massive, pollination event of almonds in California is very early in the season. So they all want bees that will build up before that. And so again, I couldn't believe it. And even later on, after I started having, really good success with keeping the bees alive without treatments, I just was absolutely shocked that so few people followed up and improved on. It wasn't just me; there were some others too, but there were very few of us. And some of these beekeepers who their family was in bees for generations. They already were well established. Some of them were quite even wealthy, and still wouldn't put in the investment that they would need to, but which they could easily have done. So that was pretty disappointing, and another just indication of how beekeeping, and this was the event that made beekeeping part of industrial agriculture, and the connections were there before this happened, but this is just what brought the whole industry into, becoming part of industrial agriculture. And now, the same thing is going on with beekeeping as in dairy farming, where the smaller apiaries go out of business. They're bought by the larger ones. The larger ones get bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, you've got almost the same ratio of people working in the apiary and beehives, but now they're all employees and with just a few owners and just a few people in a position to innovate or whatever, where you would have had many families, each with their own means of making a living. And so anyhow, am I getting too far off of the
No, I find this fascinating because, I grew up with Dad had bees, and I never really liked them because I hated getting stung. But then as I got older, I realized how unbelievably valuable and how neat bees are. And so I started having bees with very little success. But when I heard Dad talk about beekeeping and all that, just in the last 10 years, it's really piqued my interest. So I find this fascinating, especially with bringing in the Russian bees with the different characteristics. So you're still breeding Russian bees?
Yeah, I didn't become a member of the group because they really wanted to keep it a really tight lid on the Russian gene pool. They wanted all the members to be completely committed to it. And I wanted to be able to collect some other bees to include in my gene pool if I wanted to. And so that's why I didn't become a member, but I've never found anything that was nearly as good as the Russian bees. And so I call my bees Russian-based now. And I have brought in very little other stock, and I only obtain other stock from other beekeepers who haven't treated their bees for a long time, too. So,
and when you're talking about like the adapting to the characteristics of these Russian-based bees, did you figure out a way to stop the swarming and the developing a colony, or when you say work around, or you figure out how to work around that issue?
Yeah, they just need to be managed differently. And again, just think about them differently. I don't know. It could be, like the difference between Holsteins and milking shorthorns or something like that. The people who love Holsteins are not likely to switch to milking shorthorns.
That's exactly what I'm thinking as you're talking here. Is I know the dairy industry a little bit. Bees are a new world, something I haven't really been involved with. But everything that you're talking about is like similar concepts, whether it's, like you said, the Holstein or the Jersey or the milk and shorthorn versus the Italian bees and the Russian bees. It's the same concept. And most of the figuring out how to be successful with whatever it is that you're doing is between your ears.
Yes, exactly. And it's like I tell people, I said, you can't succeed at this by copying me. You can get started by copying me, but then you have to figure out a way to adapt it to your situation, which could be different from mine in many different dimensions. But that's the kind of inquiring mind you have to have, in order to really solve the problem. And
So you say Italian bees and then also the Russian bees. What other strains of the honeybee would we have here?
Yeah, there's only one other main one called the carniolan bee, which actually the Russian bees are very closely related to them and very similar. But the Italian bee by far had become the most popular bee, for good reasons. It was the first honeybees that were brought to North America. They weren't native here when the Europeans came. Were from Northern Europe, which is called the European brown bee, and they were not as productive. They didn't build up as big colonies as Italian bees, but it was all we had in North America for quite a while till someone realized the bees in Italy were far superior and started to bring them over, and then they would but we still have that German black blood in our gene pool here, but their behavioral characteristics, in general in the U.S. are dominated by the Italians. And then the carniolans were a smaller group. Again, they have smaller colonies to begin with. They winter with smaller colonies, but they're more liable to swarm, have a stronger swarming instinct is kind of their main drawback.
So when we hear about bee population decline, is part of the reason behind that, or could it be mitigated by the type of bee that's out there?
Well, it could be, hugely mitigated if the people adopted the Russian bees like they did the Italian bees in the 1890s. And again, it's just really a shame that more people didn't take an interest in this. And if they had, there would be a lot more stock available to other beekeepers, that came from untreated apiaries where the bees and my method is not working perfect. I still have much bigger loss. Well, not every year, but I still have losses larger than I did before these mites came. But that's the other key point, is that I solved this problem in my apiary by using breeding and management things together. And I don't think I could have succeeded with just one or the other. It was really the combination of the two. And just, the short description of this method of overwintering small colonies, it just, if there's a whole list of reasons why this is far superior to the old methods people were using.
Can you explain that a little bit better when you say overwintering small colonies?
Yeah, the most colonies in the northern half of the U.S. Before 1985 were overwintered in at least one of these standard boxes. That's the size the colony would fit into, and most of them were overwintered in two of those boxes and sometimes three. But I discovered by accident that a colony in just one half or 1/4 of a box could survive. It had to be set up in a certain way, but it could still be outdoors. And so this, with the same amount of equipment, I could overwinter several colonies instead of just one. That was a huge advantage. But the other advantages are that this was all from bees that I had raised myself, from bees that had already proven themselves in my area. And before this, all the replacement bee stock was raised in the South and in California. And then the interesting thing was the very first pioneers of modern beekeeping, including J.E. Crane, did raise their own queens in the north and overwintered them one way or another. But then it had been just completely forgotten when people started raising queens in the south. They could raise them much earlier. And so they could have mated queens ready in April to send up here, where it would take us until May or June to do it. And it just seemed like such a big advantage to get the queens earlier and start new colonies at that time of year, and they'd have more of the season to build up and produce a crop of honey. The system worked really well until these mites came and changed everything. And it had just been, it worked so well that beekeepers in the north, a lot of them, even very skillful people with lots of experience, didn't even think it was possible to raise queens in the northern states. They thought there must be some reason why it's not even biologically possible. But of course, they never tried. And that's what when I first started my apiary, and at the very beginning, I thought, well, why isn't anyone raising queen bees up here? Isn't that another product we could raise and sell? And so right from the beginning, when I just had 30 or 50 colonies, I was already starting to try to learn how to raise queen bees here. And then that's what resulted in the just the accidental experiment where I overwintered these little colonies. I wasn't even really intending to, but that's what happened. And when I first saw that these little colonies could overwinter, I could see the whole picture of the apiary I've built up since then, and I've only just barely scratched the surface of what's possible to do with this. And that's why I call my talk The Natural Form of a Northern Apiary, because I don't think we understood what the natural form of the apiary was before, with this part of it was missing. But now, beekeeping and beekeeping could be much more productive and profitable in the north, and at the same time, you could do really serious bee breeding here too. And because this is a harsher climate for the bees than it is in the south, and there's just the basic principle is to get livestock from a place that's more difficult than where you live. And so it was just the opposite. The bee industry had been oriented around just the opposite, assumption.
Because south is easier,
But
but you're also almost making a weaker bee.
Yeah, but they just those bees from the south did very well in the north until the tracheal mites came, and then that was the end of that. Those yellow bees from the south never did, as well after that.
You also mentioned swarming. So what would cause a colony to swarm in, say, September?
Well, that's unusual. It's not unheard of, but the swarming mechanism is their natural way of reproducing. Every creature has to have a way to reproduce, and so swarming is when the colony divides on its own, and half the bees leave with the old queen to make a new colony somewhere else, and the original colony raises a new queen of its own, and So anyway, what was your...
Well, I had a really nice colony going great and didn't check it for like 3 days and came out. They had swarmed and they were completely gone.
Right, so they didn't swarm.
They just left?
Yeah, they abscond. It's called absconding.
Okay.
When they all leave and they don't leave anything behind.
No, it was like abandoned home.
Yeah, no, I don't know, but I associate that just with these mite and disease problems that, it just, they could have realized they were not viable where they were. That was the only instinct they had left to try something different. And again, since we've had these mite problems, the bees' behavior has changed some too.
But that's fascinating. That, they know that their population or their home is infested, so they leave. And you would think an animal wouldn't be able to tell that, but it's their sense to just up and go.
Yeah, their only option left to try and save themselves.
But the mite will travel with them?
Yeah, the mites would travel with them. But again, it's totally desperate. I mean, even colonies that swarm, Tom Seeley at Cornell, who studied bees living in the wild for his whole career, he said that swarms in a decent area, even swarms at the prime time in May or June, do not have a huge chance of surviving. I think it's only, what did he say, less than 50% of them survive.
Even early swarms?
Yeah, in the wild. And he says if they have a set of combs to move on to already, if they don't have to build the combs, they have a much higher chance of surviving. But so anyway, that, the system I'm using, I'm basically creating multiple swarms from the colonies. I'm raising the queens for them myself, and then I'm protecting them, somewhat, or feeding them a little bit extra if they need it to get through the winter.
So you don't have any swarming happening naturally?
Oh, I do. Yeah, just because I can't keep up with all of them, and I can't. And the other, and that is. It's like Tom says, that's their natural instinct. It's good for them to swarm, in some sense. And a lot of these systems of making divisions were really, were mimicking that behavior, trying to utilize. And there's few different ways of doing that.
You actually see that in the Amish communities. They basically swarm to be it New York or different states for cheaper farmland.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like
they divide when they get to be. They fill up their space in one spot and they divide and move to another.
And once a church is at 40 to 42 families, the church will divide geographically.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know if that ties in or not, but it's
Were they thinking of the bees?
Maybe they think they have mites. No, I find this whole thing fascinating. We had, what was his name from Xerces Society on Pollinates?
Eric Lee Mater.
Eric Lee Mater. And I found it fascinating how the honeybee is not the most efficient pollinator, and how many pollinators are out there besides the honeybee, yet most people equate the honeybee as the one. And mom and dad have mason bees. That's in the same family?
No.
No, it's completely different bee?
Yeah, they're solitary bees.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there are a lot of the other bees that that can pollinate, and they and they rightfully deserve a lot of attention. It's just honeybees are so comparatively easy to manage by people, and like with those mason bees, you see all those tubes but you can't see how many of inside those tubes are viable. But with a colony of live bees, you can open up and you can get a pick. That they're actually live bees in there. When you bring them, and you can know 6 months. Well, they can still fail just before that, but you can tell when they're thriving and when they're not. Throughout their whole yearly cycle, so they're easier to manage. Plus, they're very good general pollinators. They're good at pollinating a lot of different crops, whereas a lot of those solitary bees and even the bumblebees are more specialized. They're especially good at some families, but not so good at others.
Now, one thing, we talked a little bit about the mites in regards to affecting a bee population. The other thing that has been in public conversation over the last years is like neonicotinoids. I can't even hardly say the word. You hear that, but I don't know what that means. The impacts of that on honeybees and pollinator populations.
Yeah, I think that's what we're dealing with right now, and in it, and it's just for me, it just seems so unfortunate that this problem that has been described to me from my customers in the Midwest for years is now coming to the Champlain Valley where I live. But these companies have really outdone themselves this time. This stuff is toxic in such tiny quantities; it's hard to detect it to begin with, even right away. And it doesn't just kill the bee or the whatever the target is necessarily. It messes with their nervous system somehow, so they can't navigate or find their way back to their nest. And so with honeybees, the bees disappear out in the field, and the colony dwindles away, and there's no evidence. There's nothing you can test, and find a residue or whatever. And then, the other really creepy thing is that, they found in some applications, like the one I read was of an apple orchard, where they were applying it for some reason to the trees, and they were taking tissue samples to see what level, of it, because it's systemic, would be in the leaves. And so they applied it for 2 or 3 years and took measurements on the leaves, and then they stopped applying it, but they kept on doing tissue samples and found that the levels were still rising 2 years later. It's obviously getting in the soil and getting in the plant, still accumulating. And this, of course, I can't prove it, of course, but this just sounds exactly like what could have caused this, this famous die-off of bees in Germany, where in the wild area they've been monitoring for decades, and now in just the last 10 years it's lost 80% of its insect biomass. But there's no application of pesticides actually in there, but they think it's coming in the groundwater and from surrounding farmland. So anyway, but again, you can't, and now the question is how do we push back against this? And
organic farming.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. That's the only, and people they use up all their energy opposing one certain application, that's in their locality or whatever. And, it uses up all the oxygen, and years go by, and we need more testing, and is it a problem, is it not? And then finally, 10 years later, say, okay, this is a problem, we need to do something. And that's the end of the useful life of that pesticide anyway. And the companies are ready with the next one, and the whole process starts over. So, it's really the mentality of the farmers that's the key thing, that it's just, so different from a life-affirming attitude that comes with organic farming, that this is the key thing. And that's why, I just decided this last part of my career, I'm shifting my focus. I did all this work with breeding bees and so they could coexist with the mites, and and had some good success. And I've been able to make a living the whole time without having another job. And but none of that's going to mean anything if the environment continues to deteriorate. So the bees can't survive there.
I did, kind of to wrap this all up with organic farming and bees. The exciting thing that I see happening is how many organic farmers are planting, whether it be pollinator habitats or having small apiaries, and farming in a way to promote honeybees and all kinds of nature. We're really seeing an increase in that over the last 10 years here, and that gets me excited.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good part of the answer, but the key is persuading more people to become organic farmers. Just to increase the percentage of land. It's like in Vermont, where even though Vermont had an reputation for organic farming, at the beginning it was mostly just vegetable growing operations that were quite small acreage wise, and there was some really interesting stuff that they did, but the total acreage was very small. But that changed completely when the organic co-ops started recruiting in Vermont. And then, each time they gain a new farm, that's like 300 or 500 acres or more. And so the organic acreage was increasing really rapidly. And that was the best thing that's happened to agriculture in Vermont during my lifetime. And, those farmers, especially the ones who started early, it just transformed their lives. They were able to paint their houses. They went on vacations. They hired people to milk for them once in a while, so they could have, it just was a wonderful thing. And, some of them have carried through it. The organic ran into its own oversupply problems and, had to reduce the price. And
so it's not just it is converting organic farmland, but it's also convincing consumers that organic is the way to go. Yeah. And, as far as the farmers, you said part of it is the economic benefit. But I know with working with people that have transitioned from a conventional way of farming, chemical farming, to an organic way of farming, there's this evolution that it sounds like you went through the exact same thing of learning how to work with nature, learning how to, not force chemicals and your way of doing things onto your livestock or your land. That's exactly what you did. Yeah. And the same thing is happening in so many different people, and that part is encouraging to see.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm really glad to hear you say that, as someone who is out there visiting a lot of farms and seeing, and if it will help Vermont, hugely if they need more milk, and they can add more farms. Yeah,
and it's not just milk; it's crops, it's vegetables. It's every last thing. That's the number one thing that I see that, and it's, we're talking from a bee perspective, but I think you also mentioned there that going broader than that, it's an environmental perspective. Yeah. And not manipulating the environment to do what it is you want it to do, working with the environment to understand how to manage and live within it. That's the answer there.
Yeah. But I think the real thing we're up against is we need more people to be organic farmers. And these farms, the conventional farm, this dog eat dog where the big fish eat the little ones, I used to think that the goal of industrial agriculture was to produce the food with the fewest possible people involved. Well, I finally realized that the goal is to produce it without any people involved at all. It's much easier to drive a tractor by satellite across the field than to drive a car at 80 miles an hour on the roads, which they can already do that. And already spray rigs are controlled by satellite, varying the amount that comes out of each one according to, some database about the soil there.
And they sell that as some sort of amazing technological innovation that we're using less pesticides. Well, you're still using them.
And there's less people, and there's less people who know what to do. And we're losing our knowledge and wisdom base about agriculture. And again, it's not just for producing food, but it's for having a decent life for people. And that was, the purpose of everything that I did with my business, was not to show I had a better method or this. It's just to be able to have a pleasant and decent, useful, healthy life living in the countryside, which I didn't grow up there, but I knew that's where I wanted to live. I had to start from scratch, So,
well, it just brings back the writings and our conversation with Wendell Berry and the promoting of, Wendell doesn't promote organic agriculture in general, or in particular, I should say. The agrarian lifestyle is what he promotes, and the way of life that comes along with it, and the benefits of that compared to the way that we've gone.
Yeah.
He referenced eyes to acres.
Yeah.
Is out of whack.
Yes. Yeah.
And
exactly.
how true is that?
Yeah. This is another way of saying the same thing. There aren't enough people
Yes.
involved. Yeah. And so that, that's the thing I'm most proud of now is that I have 5 young people that I have helped to get started doing what I'm doing now. And, there's 2 of them, including Abe Yoder, who are raising their families just from an apiary that's much smaller than mine. And mine is, not even measurable on the industrial commercial beekeeping scale. They hate to admit I'm even a commercial beekeeper.
Because I was going to ask you, did somebody come knocking on your door like you did when you were a kid? Is this because you said that, there would be a couple generations now that kind of got the start the same way. Is this how these next people are going to do it?
Yeah, it was how they all came. Yeah. 2 of them. I have photos of them in my presentation for tomorrow. But one of them lives right in my neighborhood, and Troy Hall across the river in New Hampshire, and Abe Yoder here, and there's a couple in West Virginia, and another one in Western Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I give these 8-day workshops where people come and stay for 8 days at my place, and I do with 5 people at a time, and so they get to see the whole, that during the weeks when all the different jobs are going on, and the routine that I use to raise the queen bees during the summertime, and that's been that's been just, I started it just on a whim just to see what would happen, and that's been a huge success in my eyes. It's like not all those people want to be commercial beekeepers, but almost every one of them is using what they've learned, and and some of them, that's how some of them did come to me first.
Well, if that isn't a testament to what it is you're doing and a living lasting legacy, then I don't know what is.
I just hope the environment will hold up enough for them, to succeed. I have complete confidence in them if they could do it in a cleaner environment like what I had when I was developing mine. So that's why I'm trying to find more ways I can be connected with organic farming, together. And Yeah, and the commercial, the beekeeping community is, again, it's just been subsumed into the industrial mentality. The research people, they say, oh, we have to use IPM for bees. We have to get along with everybody, and I just finally decided, no, I'm not going to go there. That's just not right. There's too big a difference between what is really healthy and what will create a good future and what won't. And we have to be aligned with what we think will yield a healthy and a decent future for for young people who are out there and later generations. And this industrial approach is just a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, Kirk, I love this conversation. This was really, really, there's so many things about bees I want to learn now. So thank you for what you've done, and thank you for what you're doing.